And we're gonna go live. We're gonna go
After,
live.
I really think this whole live stream just needs to be rechanged to technical difficulties because every week it's something.
Yeah, that's what we should call the new live stream show. So,
Yeah.
speaking of live stream, hopefully we are actually live at this point. Hopefully everybody can hear us. I'm looking in the chat right now to see if we can get some confirmation on that. But in the meantime, I'll go ahead and get the introductions going. I am Ketwolski here, joining you guys live with the Trek Central YouTube channel. And I'm joined today by two fantastically wonderful people. We have Trek Central's very own Commander Brie. Commander Brie, how are you doing today?
Hello. I'm doing good. Just it's one of those days.
Yeah, that's okay. I do understand that. And we are also joined today for our amazing discussion with the fantastic and wonderful YouTuber and content creator, E.C. Henry. E.C. Henry, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. And for those of you guys and gals that don't know E.C. Henry, he runs a fantastic YouTube channel known as E.C. Henry. He also has quite a bit of stuff online, his own website. He has his Instagram accounts. He's available on Twitter. He does have a Patreon as well if you guys want to go ahead and support him. If you're not already subscribed, you should be, because he does fantastic videos covering all sorts of different topics, not just Star Trek. But today we are going to be talking about Star Trek ships. And we figured no other person to be having on this channel other than maybe Trek Yards, if we wanted to have a 14-hour discussion about it. Burn, Trek Yards. We're going to bring E.C. Henry on, and we're going to have a good conversation. So, are you guys ready?
Let's do it.
Good.
All right. So, the first thing I want to talk a little bit about is we'll talk a little bit about Picard. I think that's the most recent show that is fresh in people's minds. And two of the biggest things that I think you kind of have made videos about, EC, were the reusing of technology from, really essentially the visuals, but reutilizing technology that was seen in the Discovery era. And also, you did a really fantastic video that I thought about the holographic interface on board the La Sirena. So I want to talk to you first about your video of Discovery's ships kind of appearing in Picard, specifically the shuttlecrafts appearing inside of the actual series. So why don't you talk to those videos there, and for those people that have not seen it, what was your kind of focus on that in that video?
Oh, I mean, it's been a while since I've seen the video, right? So,
Okay.
it kind of struck me once they showed that Children of Mars short trek, where we see dry dock facilities in orbit around Mars, and we see a Discovery era dry dock with Discovery era ships in it, with Discovery era shuttles and Discovery era work bees. And that was just like, okay, so like if we just occasionally saw Discovery shuttles flying around, that's one thing. Like, you can easily say like, well, it's like a classic car, or something like that. We see it as a taxi, we see it as a school bus. Like, okay, these are acceptable uses of an old asset. I might even say creative, but you kind of see people online defending like, well, they're pulling old ships out of mothballs because they're making a rescue fleet, whatever. But like, okay, so you could argue that, but why are you refitting them in vintage dry docks with vintage shuttles and vintage work bees? Like, it would have been kind of interesting to see, like, say, the Star Trek Nemesis dry dock with Discovery era ships in it and contemporary shuttles and work bees working on them. That would show some level of care and thought. But the fact that literally nothing in the shot is identifiable as contemporary Star Trek, contemporary to the era that it's supposed to be, that is very suspicious to me. Like, there's no any in-universe justification for that. It's just very unconvincingly stretching the credibility of the world.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying there. It's actually kind of an interesting a thought process, right? Because in the series of Picard, we're faced with a situation where a large portion of the rescue fleet is destroyed, this new fleet that they're building. And would have been interesting to see if after the destruction of this new fleet was had taken place, that they had attempted to bring out these Discovery shuttles or these Discovery era ships from mothballs to try to augment some of those ones that had been destroyed. But they kind of made it seem like those were the designs that they were building. And there's, I think, maybe some beta canon extended universe discussion to be had about why they were utilizing those designs. Obviously, the most realistic answer, which we can all understand from a real perspective, is it was intended to save some money because ships are expensive to design and they were trying to save some money. It is what it is. But Brie, I want to throw this kind of thing over to you because I know we've talked about this a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm hearing EC Henry's perspective here. What do you think about the reutilization of the ships inside of Picard?
So when we first talked about this, I was in the camp of I personally don't care quite as much, but this is also coming from somebody who, if I have mentioned it once before or several times before, like Star Trek ship lore and the new ship designs aren't necessarily, I know it's why some people really like Trek, but to me, I don't focus on it too much. I like the story a lot more, and I know everyone's different, but to be fair, if I did care about that more than I do, I would probably be a little bit more upset. And talking to you and hearing your view, EC, when you were talking about visual effects, like the two excuses I had where I was like trying to give them benefit of the doubt for that final scene, like after watching your video and after us talking just before this, I was like, okay, it does seem more like it was to cut corners, which I don't necessarily like, but I also don't know what was going on behind the scenes there, so I want to give them the benefit of the doubt. But again, this is someone who doesn't focus too much on the ships like some other people, so I like ships, but it's not, it's not like you guys. You guys know so much about the ships that it blows my mind. So I always feel like I'm like out of my league when you guys are talking, and I'm like, I know the name of that ship class, can't tell you what series it's from.
No, you bring up a really valid point, and I think that kind of launches us into a little bit of a different aspect of this discussion, which is that your perspective of, yeah, they're just starships, I don't really particularly care, it is an interesting viewpoint because from my personal experience, a lot of people that are excited to watch Discovery and Picard, for that matter, weren't necessarily Star Trek fans previously, and they don't really notice or care about these things. But does that necessarily make them a poor decision? I feel like in some cases it does.
Right.
Because if the ships aren't there for people who could care less, the very least I feel like they could have done something to kind of get people more excited about some of the ships that they had in there. One of the longest running discussions that we had during our live streams was Jack constantly wanting to see more starships. He wanted to see an Odyssey class. He wanted to see more ship variations than what we actually got. But it is an interesting thing, I think, to really think about, like, if their intention is to really appeal to a different audience, are they being effective with what they're doing then? Because does it not necessarily does this decision actually impact the target audience that they may be going for? What do you think about that, EC?
Oh, see, this is the issue, because like you could make the argument that CBS is trying to appeal to a new audience with new Star Trek. The problem is the only reason they're making new Star Trek is to capitalize on an IP that already has a fan base. So what marketing sense does it make to make Star Trek appeal to new fans when the only reason they're making it is to appeal to old fans? Like, the whole justification for Star Trek Picard is we'll bring in some clout from a show that everyone likes and we'll make a new show so that they all watch it. It's Star Trek Picard as a concept, in theory, shouldn't appeal to non-Star Trek fans. It should only appeal to Star Trek fans. The whole idea is a almost kind of cynical grab at nostalgia for people that are like, yeah, I liked TNG, Picard, yeah. It's not going to have any effect on new fans who've never seen any of the shows. So I very heavily question the sense behind appealing to a new fan base. So for me, when I want to give them the benefit of the doubt, saying, well, they're trying to appeal to a new fan base is actually quite uncharitable to them, because that would be, in my opinion, a very bad marketing move.
Yeah, I agree.
My thought is more that they just don't get it. They don't understand why people like Star Trek. They themselves don't like Star Trek. Like those are my more charitable assumptions, and in my opinion, that's giving them the benefit of the doubt by saying that they just don't get it. But
yeah, it is quite the conundrum, right? Where the discussion of we want to pull in new Star Trek fans, that argument I think made quite a bit more sense for Discovery because it was such a drastic change to a lot of different, not only storytelling elements but also visually. There was like, okay, so I get the argument there, but you're right to say Picard really is geared directly towards Star Trek fans, diehard Star Trek fans. You know, again, a good buddy of mine who watched Star Trek Picard constantly was texting me while he was watching them, like, who's this person? What's the deal with this? I don't understand who these people are, because he had never seen TNG before. He had never seen the movies before. He was just watching the new Star Trek shows. So it is quite the interesting conundrum that they've put themselves into. Let's go ahead and get to these donations here really quick. Evolution DL Film, thank you so much for the $2 donation. And Sean Kesey, thank you very much for the $5 donation. He asked the question of, can't believe that Picard takes place not long after TNG, and yet Romulan and Federation ships look so different. Should have been D'Deridex and Sovereign variants. Okay, so that is a very interesting kind of point there. The ship classes have certainly upgraded quite a bit, especially the Romulan ones, considering the state of the Romulan shipyards would be in, I assume, essentially disarray. I am curious as to what you guys feel about the Romulan and Federation looking ships that we saw, essentially mainly the big fleets that we got towards the end of the series there in the finale. Brie, what did you think about them? Would you have preferred to see something more traditional looking from TNG, or did you like the new kind of designs that they had given us?
So I'm kind of 50-50. I do kind of wish that when the actual fleet had shown up of Romulan ships that would have gotten more classic looking Romulan ships. However, I like the inclusion of like the Snakehead ship, I think is what they called it. I like the like little things like that, like adding new ships to the mix was nice. But I do agree. I think it would have been nice to at least like a variant even of the more TNG era Romulan ships. But again, I'm not going to say I didn't like the new design. I did like it, but I personally, would have liked to see some kind of callback to this more along the style of TNG.
I would definitely agree with you there. I think that the film Nemesis and the design of some of the ships, specifically, I believe it's the Mogai Warbird. Somebody correct me if I got that wrong. That we saw the Romulans were flying around there. I felt like created a little bit of a weird bridge gap between TNG and where the Romulan ships were. So I feel like maybe some of the designers had some issues with just straight up showing us some more traditional Romulan warbirds, even though we did get the TOS. I think it's the Tavaro that was in there. But what do you think, EC? Do you think that they should have went with something a little bit more traditional, maybe stepped away from the Nemesis looking designs? Because that seems to be like where they were headed. They like did an evolution of the Nemesis designs, which doesn't fit necessarily the narrative there. What do you think?
Right. I don't think the Romulans should have had any new ships whatsoever. They should have had, at the most recent ship they should have been using was the Warbird from Nemesis.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with no recognizable Federation ships, because they're always making new ships.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They always have a huge variety of ships. Romulans are be fielding massive fleets of identical ships, cutting edge new designs. Like at best, if you wanted a massive fleet of Romulan ships, it should have been a very hodgepodgey kind of fleet. Like the Romulans have basically, if we maybe make a Star Wars comparison, the Romulans aren't the Empire anymore. They're the Rebellion now. They're this little ragtag group. And their fleets should look like what Rebel fleets look like in Star Wars, which are cobbled together from different sources, and you have these like stripped down, ugly looking junk ships, basically. Like that's how the Romulans should be after their planet is destroyed. I just don't buy it that they have this like huge fleet of cutting edge warships that they can send on some extremely binge mission. It stretches my credibility a little far.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah, no. Oh, sorry. Go
I
ahead.
was gonna say that's actually why I didn't bring up Federation ships when I had said it would have been nice to see, the more TNG era warbirds is, or you know what I mean. And was like EC said, we do see Federation ships all the time and a lot of variation of them. So I was kind of more shying away from that one because I can agree I would have more preferred if they were gonna pick a new ship to go with, that would have made more sense for it to be Federation than Romulan, especially given the circumstances.
Yeah, no, I'm hearing both what you guys are saying there. I narratively speaking, and it's kind of weird, right? Because they created this scenario where the Romulans were, kind of limping along through the galaxy, but then they also provided them with this massive, massive fleet of new warships. I feel like it could have worked better if they went one of two ways. If they could have kept their massive scale fleet, I feel like, because that's what they like, big fleets, in this new Star Trek series. But it should have been the hodgepodge, like you were suggesting, EC. That it should have been a bit more patched together with different era ships. That would have actually been really fun for us as longtime Trek fans to actually get a chance to re-see some of those old school ships kind of reappear. They should have either done it that way, or a much smaller fleet of advanced ships where it's like, these are the Zotvash elite ships that we have never seen before, and you could kind of spin it in a way of like, well, you've just never seen them before because you've never heard of the Zotvash, which the Zotvash is a whole separate issue and discussion to get into, but they could have spun it in different ways. I don't buy the concept that the Zotvash would have had this many ships just kind of hanging around. I think they ran into a similar issue with Section 31 at the end of Discovery Season 2, where Section 31 had these massive fleets that were zipping around. It doesn't really fit the narrative that they've built around these particular organizations. But I do want to go ahead and switch it to the Federation discussion, which is, I liked the new design of the Federation ship that we saw at the end. I thought it looked pretty good. There were a couple of variations. I want to say there was 3 different variations of the same ship, and by variations, I put that in air quotes. You guys can't see because they were just like slightly discolorations on the nacelles and stuff like that. But it did seem also a little much for them to have the exact same amount of, like, it was like a 1-for-1. It felt like it was like the Romulans are showing up with 300 ships and the Federation have to show up with 300 ships. And it felt a little like, it felt a little weird to me that they showed up with that many of the exact same looking ship. It felt a little strange. What did you think about that, EC?
Well, there's definitely a few things to consider here. Firstly, the first thing I thought when I was watching the show is the just sheer lack of effort to have copy paste ships appear. Like, where every single ship, at least at first glance, appeared to be literally exactly the same ship, and it turns out it's only, they're basically literally the exact same ship. And I had trouble getting over just how, like, recklessly thoughtless it was. And I'm not really a negative person. I'm not really a critical person. And, people actually kind of criticize me for not being critical enough. But that was one thing where I just couldn't believe how little effort there was. Like, okay, we'll design one kind of low poly ship asset and that'll be it. And it's like, you've got CGI assets of other ships. Like, you have access to them. You could just use old ships. The actual lazy thing to do would have been to use old ship designs, and that would have been better. But they did this, like, absolute worst possible path with what they did. And that's my first thought. The second thought is more just from a storytelling perspective, where we have literally never seen a fleet engagement this large in Star Trek. Not even at the height of the largest war we've ever seen in the series have we seen this many ships engaged in one mission. It's for this, like, random thing happening in some random corner of the galaxy that nobody really knows about, yet they can field thousands and thousands and people and hundreds of ships. It's not the world that Star Trek takes place in. Star Trek is supposed to happen in our world, in our universe. And it just, like you can pull that kind of stunt in the Rise of Skywalker. You can't pull that stunt in Star Trek. And I don't know, it hurts me to think about how much better it could have been.
Yeah, I would agree. You know, I think the copy paste fleet, I think, hurt the narrative of the finale. I'm glad that they didn't end it with a giant space battle.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was a great narrative decision. I don't know which one of the writers or producers said, hey, we should probably not have all 500 ships shooting at each other. I don't know if it was maybe just because they didn't have the money to film that. I don't know, but it was definitely a smart narrative decision to go away from that, or to turn them into them all fighting the giant synthipede that was coming through the portal or whatever. Smart choice there. Yeah, I agree though. The copy paste fleet did undercut, I feel like, the importance of the narrative that they were trying to get at, and it felt a little out of place for the show that they were filming. You know, it was a very touching show about Picard's personal journey, and then it kind of culminated in this massive buildup of arms at the end there, and it felt very out of place, and then it rushed to an end, you know, and then we got the more emotional climax, which really should have just been the focus to begin with. But I'm going to switch gears here real quick. We got a couple of more donations. Amir has donated $5. Thank you so much for the donation. It says, the Romulans with a Borg ship, meaning the Borg cube, and all of its technology, they should have had much more advanced ships. Now, this is an interesting, I think, concept. I do want to go ahead and state that I personally really loved the design of the Borg cube that they had in the show. I mean, obviously, it's kind of hard to screw up a Borg cube. It's literally just a giant cube. But I liked the way it looked. I liked the battle damage that it had. I liked the exposed shield look. I thought that was a very cool design. I really enjoyed it. I wish we actually got to spend a bit more time looking at some of the exterior shots of the Borg cube. But it is an interesting thing, right? Because they built up that subplot earlier in the series that the Romulans were stealing the Borg technology to do something with. But I don't feel like we got much of a payoff as to what they were doing. What do you think about that, Brie?
Well, I don't know. I do agree. I would have liked to see a more emotional payoff versus, like you said, the fact that they didn't do a space battle. I 100% agree with you. I don't think that would have been a good choice. And yeah, I do think that an emotional payoff over that would have been more, what's the word I'm trying to look for? Impactful. Maybe? Thank you. Yes, it would have been a heck of a lot more impactful if if the whole finale was just very emotional based. I don't necessarily want to say it completely took me out of the narrative by having that space confrontation come up. However, I do think the more successful way probably would have been to spend more time focusing on the emotional part, mainly because when Picard dies, there's only like a 3 to 5 minute gap between him dying and him being put into the golem, and there's only like 3 to 5 minutes of people being really sad. I think it would have been more impactful had he maybe died at the very beginning, and then you have an entire episode where you have no idea exactly what's going to go on. Everyone's grieving, everyone feels different ways, it's impacting the story, and then in the very end, after like almost an hour or more of payoff, you know, the finale happens. I think that probably could have been more successful than bringing in the space battle, but at the same time, had they not done something like that, everyone would complain that they didn't tie up a loose end.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you there. Absolutely. I think that would have actually been a little bit more of more connected to the story that they were creating with the series of Picard there. Definitely, I agree. EC, I want to get your thoughts really quickly about about that comment there from Amir about the Romulans utilizing the Borg technology. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, in general, Star Trek Picard completely forgets about the whole Borg thing. They built up this actually quite interesting situation, an extremely interesting setting with this like reclaimed Borg cube, and it literally has nothing to do with anything else. Literally nothing. This is literally just an interesting setting.
Mm-hmm.
Who doesn't play a part? Borg technology doesn't play a part. It's very annoying that just kind of forgot about it. And basically every plot thread they bring up in the show, just kind of forget about. But that's a separate issue. I would say that it's maybe not clear that the Romulans are not using Borg technology. Like, you could easily justify that maybe they have all those bajillions of ships because they're using a Borg or using Borg nanoprobes or something to manufacture new ships or something. Like, of course, that's not in the show, and I doubt they thought of that. But you could easily retcon that. Like, well, where did this, crippled power get all these ships? Well, they have that Borg cube, that sort of thing.
Right.
I would say, like, how do you know that they didn't? But of course, obviously, the show didn't do that because the show got that the Borg were in the script. So, yeah, I mean, I don't really like using the Borg as kind of like a solution to things, though. That I got very tired of that with Star Trek Voyager. It kind of reared its ugly head again with Star Trek 2009. People felt that they had to justify the design of Nero's mining ship by saying that it was enhanced with Borg technology. It's like, I don't think you need to do that. The ship makes sense as a mining ship, a little bit of imagination. And I use the example, an oil rig doesn't look anything like a battleship. So why should Nero's mining ship look anything like a warbird?
Right.
Like,
right.
It's a completely different vessel for a completely different purpose. If you imagine that all those little tendrils can open up and grab onto asteroids and crush them and suck them into that huge hangar bay, like, it makes sense as an asteroid mining ship with a little bit of imagination. So, like, that's just to say you don't need to justify things with Borg technology. Star Trek is a very flexible world, but also at the same time, you shouldn't have to justify things. Like, I think design should be clear enough that it makes sense to the audience without having to do the homework, as it were. Like, I don't know. It should just be. It should be visually obvious, and I think that Star Trek is getting further and further away from strong visual communication.
So, talking on kind of what Amir said and kind of what you said, where it's possible that they could have used Borg tech, but it wasn't mentioned. The Snakehead, I always, like, when I saw it, I thought it looked like it had some kind of Borg tech, more like the design aesthetic than anything else. And I wasn't sure if that was, a ship that they created in conjunction with Borg technology, or if it was just, I kind of want to give them the benefit of the doubt and say that, that's where some of the new technology and ships came from, because they were using a reclamation cube, so they did have access to it. So there's nothing that says that they couldn't have spent the time in between the supernova and finding the cube and the events that we see to enhance ships or create prototypes, or, like, I'm pretty sure they don't mention whether the Snakehead was something that existed beforehand. I thought they had said it was new. I could be wrong, but I could have sworn they mentioned in the show that it was new. So, something like that could have been a Borg tech thing. And I can see, like, I agree the 2009, I don't like the idea of the Nero ship being enhanced with Borg technology. That one didn't make sense to me. I agree. This one, I kind of want to say it makes a little more sense, and I can see them maybe having forgot to mention or not have time to mention, or it not got put in the script, but in their minds, the ships they were using had some kind of Borg tech, is kind of how I was seeing it.
Could certainly work with the story because the Borg are already in the story, and that would have been some way to make the Borg cube make sense in the narrative. At least make it have some payoff. Somebody just asked the question, where did they get all these ships? And get some revelation that they were actually secretly building ships somewhere deep in the Borg cube. Alas.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that that's a good point. One of the issues that I brought up during my review of the finale was the whatever happened with the liberated Borg drones and the Borg cube kind of didn't really get a resolution because it felt like it had been sidelined a little bit. And they could have done a little bit more work on the script to kind of integrate those two ideas together. And really, it could have just been a simple line of somebody saying, where did they get those ships from? And then Raffi spouts it off like, where do you think they got them from? And those are modified Borg tech or something like that. It would have been a very simple line to kind of explain a little bit more about what was going on there. One of the ship designs I did actually like. I did not like the standard Romulan fighter ship that we saw, like whatever class that was. Not the Snakehead, but the one that was in the fleet. I really liked the design, or at least parts of the design that we saw Commodore O on, that flagship that she was on. I feel like that ship at least had, like you were talking about earlier, EC, about some of the visual kind of references to previous designs, so that when you see the ship, people are immediately able to recognize, okay, this is a Ferengi ship, this is a Federation ship, this is a Klingon ship, this is a Romulan ship. That one to me felt like, when you looked at it, it felt like it was Romulan in origin. And I think that there was a deliberate attempt to kind of create that visual connection between that ship and the design, specifically the design of the D'Deridex coming before that. And it's actually interesting is, I know we talked about this already with the massive amounts of fleets. What would have been interesting, I think, is if that was the only ship maybe that had shown up, and it was this new designed Zotvash warbird that had some visual ties to the D'Deridex, and it looked like somebody had maybe done some advancements to it years prior, but this was this hidden warship that we had never seen, this new class of warship that we had not seen before. What did you think of that design, EC?
I mean, I don't hate any of the Romulan ships in Picard. I think they all serve their purpose, as it were. I don't really like any of them. They're all kind of just like alien airplanes, which works, but you know, there are some interesting things with the flagship, as you said. Like if you kind of break it down, it's kind of like the D'Deridex with no, it doesn't have any like spindly bits anymore. So like the head is kind of merged with the wing body. Of course, it doesn't have the kind of annular wing design anymore, but you took the top half of TNG Warbird and then slotted its head back into the body, you get something very close to what we see in Picard, and I think that's completely logical. It's a sensible development of the design. It's very hard for me to take it seriously, unless of course you reimagine the scene, like what you said, like only that ship showed up. If only that ship showed up, I would completely buy it. But it's like it showed up with tons of other ships, so I have to take it in that context. It's hard for me to take anything seriously with the Romulans when I don't feel it fits the world that they've built. And all that said, I don't have an actual problem with any of the Romulan ships. I do wonder what happened to warp nacelles. None of the Romulan ships have noticeable warp nacelles, which you could say
they're cloaked. That's it. They're cloaked. Yeah.
You could easily say, well, you don't want them to be an obvious target, so they should be integrated. Yes, you can say that, but Star Trek is also very good, or at least historically has been very good at creating this technological world where ships, like, Star Trek kind of almost prides itself on every ship having noticeable, recognizable features shared across the races, where it's like, this is how you do it. This is how warp drive is possible. It's possible with cells, and like there's just I forget who said it, but like it might have been established with Matt Jeffries. Like when you look at the Federation, Klingon, and Romulan ships in the original series, they all have basically the same features. They all, and when you get away from that, the further you get away from that, I think the less credibility that the technological world has. Where I should be able to look at a Star Trek ship and be able to point to something and say, that's where they have the warp coils. This is the navigational deflector. These are the impulse engines. Like, I should be able to do that with every Star Trek ship in theory. But Star Trek has been getting further and further away from that, and I think every time they do that, the weaker world becomes.
Well, I definitely hear what you're saying, and there was, I think, a design simplicity to the way a lot of Star Trek ships looked in the past. A few ships kind of come to mind that look a bit different, but they're usually super alien races. The Ferengi ship, for instance, does come to mind, and that looked a little bit different in terms of its overall design. And I'm not super familiar with the actual technological specifications, because I know that Romulan ships use singularity drives. So I don't know if they still require the same type of style visually from like a physical layout perspective. But I also do know that regardless of their singularity drives, currently being used, they've always used them. And then previously, those ships did have noticeably available nacelles that you could clearly make out, no matter what ship and era you were looking at. So it is an interesting thing to think about that the designs themselves, even the Mogai warbird from Nemesis, still had noticeable nacelles on the sides, even though they were kind of further away and they were a bit smaller than we were used to seeing, but it was still relatively there. But I do want to switch gears here real quick on everybody. I know we're spending a lot of time talking about the stuff from Picard. So I want to shift the gears a little bit into some theory crafting. And Brie, I'm going to throw this to you first. So Discovery Season 3 is launching itself into the future. We're in the 3000s and some change. And from what we gather, there's a bit of disarray with the Federation, and there's going to be some different factions at play. But the thing I wanted to ask both of you guys, but Brie, I'm going to throw this to you first, is what kind of ships are you expecting to see in the future? Obviously, we're going to have the Discovery, and that's obvious. But what ships are you looking forward to seeing inside of Discovery Season 3? Or do you want to see some rehashed older ships that maybe are still kind of patched together, limping on? Do you want to see some brand new ships? Do you want to see some flat, long designs like the Enterprise J? What are you interested in seeing?
Okay, so I've brought this up so many times because I am an Enterprise fan. I think it's an underrated series, and I've mentioned several times how the timeline is almost so perfect with the temporal Cold War that I think something that would be interesting, even if it's not the same timeline as the temporal Cold War. I don't know if going into the future changed anything. Obviously it says the Federation's fallen apart, but in the temporal Cold War that never got a conclusion, you don't really see who wins. So what if all those ships that you saw in that one episode when God, what's his name?
Daniels,
thank you. Daniels takes him into the future and puts him on a ship, and he's like, oh, look at all these ships out here fighting. I bet you if you paused, you'd be able to see some ships and be like, okay, that'd be a pretty... I can't off the top of my head remember because it was a very short scene, but that's the one time I can think of that Star Trek went that far into the future and actually showed Starfleet ships. So I think if I went back and watched that episode and then watched Season 3 of Discovery, I'd be extremely excited if I saw any kind of callback to that, if they are going with the whole timeline being really overlapping. Because even if it's after the temporal Cold War, say that they did lose and that's why the Federation is falling apart, because this is what I would write Season 3 as someone who's an Enterprise fan. But seeing cobbled together ships in that sense, yeah, I'd like to see that. Cobbled together ships from like 900 years ago, absolutely not.
Okay, so you're kind of looking for some variation of what we have been kind of teased in the future from previous episodes, mixed kind of together, and maybe some new ideas. So, EC, what are you thinking about for Discovery Season 3 ship wise?
Oh, if somebody asked me to design, what century is Season 3 taking place in?
900 years, 900 something years into the future from Discovery.
250, 900 years later is
like 900 and something. I think it's like 950.
Yeah, it's like 30. It's like the year 35 something like that. 35 something like that.
Very, very far in the future.
Very far in the future, right? It'll be after that Battle of Procyon 5 where we saw the J. It'd be after that.
I think that was 26.
Yeah, it wasn't. Yeah, it was. I'd have to look it up again. But
I kind of want to go and see what episode they say that. Because I'm pretty sure they give a year for the episode I'm thinking. I'll get back to you guys on that.
I think Daniels is from the era of Discovery Season 3.
Yeah, I think so. That's why I'm so excited.
Yeah. They could easily do something with like Daniels and stuff like that.
I've been saying that since the beginning, that I pray Daniels shows up. I've been putting money on it that Daniels is going to be somehow in the plot of Season 3, and I would be so excited.
That's definitely believable. I think that is roughly the same time period.
Mm-hmm.
But if say CBS came to me and said, design us Starfleet ships, or human ships for year, after the year 3000 or whatever, I would try to do something kind of bold but also classic. What I would do is I would make disk ships that basically flying saucers with no clear front and back. They would have kind of the familiar stylings of like a Federation ship. So like say like a
Like-
metallic disc.
I was gonna say,
There's
like
like
when
a
the saucer
blue-
section disconnects on TNG, like just the saucer section kind of thing.
But make it non-directional.
Okay.
So what I would do is I would make a ring all the way around the disc that's just like a very thin blue line to indicate warp coils like all around it. And then you would have like little like zones of Bussard collectors and stuff like that. Like, it's looking very cool in my head, but something that if we as Star Trek fans saw it, we'd be like, hey, that kind of looks like a Starfleet ship, but it's not. Like it's just a saucer. Something like that, something that would be almost an iconic thing, where it's not just like, oh, there's another Starfleet ship. It's like, oh wow, this is different. It's bold, it's iconic.
We have seen a future ship. Someone just mentioned in chat from Calypso was about the same time frame. The ship that guy crashed on or was picked up by the Discovery on.
Well, just to clarify, we don't know for sure what time period that is from,
true.
because the Discovery was in that nebula for 1,000 years, and we don't know where that starting point has come from. So that could be at any point in time.
But something like
yes,
that
is
style of
the
ship
future.
is
Yeah.
what I'm kind of envisioning.
Okay. Yeah, EC, you that's an interesting idea. You're kind of talking like a very advanced flying saucer in some regards. But I like the idea of it being a little bit more fluid in its design, almost, where it's more contained and still has those visual cues of the coloring and the style, but is also something very, very foreign, where you could even play that up kind of for laughs in some regards if you had like the engineers of the Discovery seeing these new styled ships and being like, where's your warp nacelles? And they're like, you warp nacelles? Like, what the heck are you talking? Like, something kind of funny, something like that, where they could kind of play that up for laughs or whatever it is, and kind of introduce us as the audience along with our fish out of water characters, which is the Discovery crew, to these new styles of technology. I'm kind of in the middle between the two of you guys. I would like to see a little bit of a because it looks to me like there's obviously some factions roaming around, but there's a bit of Federation still present. And I think I would like to see it so that whatever faction was remaining that was still holding on to the quote unquote Federation had that kind of advanced warship style ship that you were talking about, EC. But some of the other factions maybe have taken over or commandeered and repatched some of the abandoned mothballed fleets from Starfleet's past, and they're using them to kind of dominate their quadrants of the galaxy or their corners of the galaxy. I think that would be kind of fun to see, just all sorts of different things. I really want them to turn up, though. I don't know if you guys agree with me, but bottom line is, after what we got from Picard, I really want them to just crank up the amount of ships that we see on screen to another degree, because I feel like we've been starved a little bit of starships recently. We got a lot of different starship designs in Discovery Season 2, but I want to see, Discovery's supposed to be the space opera, the big epic. So they need to turn up that starship design and really demonstrate some cool ideas. And hopefully, like you were saying earlier, EC, like, I'm hoping that whatever they decide to go with, the factions that the Discovery is going to have to be engaged with, their specific style of ships or whatever ships that they're using become their visual representation, so that when they're moving around or we see them on screen, we know what factions we're looking at and who the players are, without having to cut to the internal bridge shot of the crews of those ships. I think that would be something that we need to have.
That the Star Trek has historically been very good at very strong visual association with things, and I think that there's a danger of like the more wild that ships become, the more spiky bits they have, more glowy bits they have, the more indistinct they become. Which is why I would go with something. That's why I suggested something like a flying saucer. It's like it's not original, but it's old and it's simple, and like I feel like we're kind of in this weird zone where we're at very high risk of coming indistinct.
No, that's a good point. You know, you do bring up a valid point, and I think that the visual connections to the races that are piloting the ships has been a staple of Star Trek, and I think that that's. I'd love to be in those design rooms, you know, where they're probably having these discussions in depth, I would imagine, and trying to figure out how do they advance the design whilst trying to keep things more connected. And I think in Picard's case, I think there was some misses and a few hits, but I'm hoping that, you know, we get to see something more unique and exciting visually for Discovery Season 3. Like even Season 2, I thought had some really cool designs. Like I liked the design of the Bakul, larger Bakul warships that they had. I thought that was like a very like monolithic, very imposing style design where I remember seeing it on screen for the first time and being like, these things are massive. These things mean business. Like I would not want to screw around with these things. And it reminded me a little bit of, I don't know if this is maybe a huge callback, but there was an old TNG episode with the Shellyak. The Shellyak corporate showed up and they had like this weird looking ship. It looked like a bunch of ships kind of stuck together with like some weird designs to it. It was definitely alien in design, but when they showed up, the character that they had inside the ship didn't match the imposing character, you know, that was in the ship as opposed to the way the design of the ship looked. And I thought the way that the Bakul actually physically looked and the design of their ships, I thought was a very unique design that they put together. So I feel like they're capable of doing it. I feel like in that instance, they proved that they have the ability and the know-how to put those things together. And I hope that they kind of carry those designs forward into the future.
Absolutely. There's definitely some effective, like, I don't want to criticize when I make criticisms. If I don't mention something, it's probably because I don't have a problem with it. Like, are definitely effective designs and effective things that have been done in new Star Trek. It's just, in my opinion, the misses are kind of unjustifiable. Like there's nothing like yeah, well, I understand how they didn't get that right. It's like, well, no, it's like the things you didn't get right you should have gotten right. But that's again kind of going off the rails into more into a broader territory.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. I understand what you mean there. There's a much larger discussion. This is kind of a microscopic view of a much larger discussion to be had with the caretaking of the Star Trek franchise and people's different opinions on how things are kind of moving forward from a franchise perspective as a whole. This is just kind of a specific view into all that. So I don't want to. We're at an hour right now, about ish. We're hitting up to an hour here shortly. So I want to go ahead and get one more big topic kind of covered here, and then we'll go ahead and open it up for some quick questions from the chat. So, EC, I do want to talk a little bit about another very popular video that you created in regards to Star Trek Picard, which was the VR digital kind of, I guess you could say, control panels that were present on the La Sirena. You made a very short video. I thought it was quite interesting, actually. You made a very short video. It was about 5 minutes in length, where you talked a little bit about how you didn't like that design and you presented an alternative view to that. I wanted you to kind of talk a little bit about that video and share what your point was in that.
Okay, well, yeah, my bigger point with that is that sci-fi has become extremely reliant on this extremely impractical technology, which is floating holographic interfaces.
Mm-hmm.
The video I lay out why it's kind of ubiquitous, because it's this extremely easy visual effect. It doesn't require any design. It doesn't require any physical work. You can just slap in graphic tracked into a scene. You're done. Suddenly you've got a futuristic environment. You know, mission accomplished. But there are problems with it. There are usability problems. Firstly, like nobody would use these things because they would be horrific in terms of eye strain and general fatigue, like holding your arms up and swinging them around in the air and like things like this. It's not
Yeah.
even it's not even just implausible. Like that sort of hologram probably will never exist in the real world. And so it's not just like an implausibility thing, but like if it did exist, people wouldn't use it because it would just be uncomfortable. There's that whole thing. Then I also talk about how it's not right for Star Trek because Star Trek has this visual world is not cluttered with that kind of stuff. And once you start cluttering it up with that kind of stuff, it doesn't look like Star Trek anymore. So part of my assertion is Star Trek on any other sci-fi is these incredibly interesting holographic technologies. Like Star Trek is a world where a hologram is not some flickering, translucent, two-dimensional computer screen floating in the air. Holograms are people, not even just lifelike images of people. Holograms are people in Star Trek. Like the most complex thing imaginable is holograms in Star Trek. So why doesn't Star Trek use holograms their full extent? If you want to have holographic displays, do it the Star Trek way and make them physical objects. That's kind of the whole point of the video, where I reimagine holographic interfaces of La Sirena with Star Trek holograms, where yes, they have a holographic console, but that means that an actual console materializes in front of them. Stuff like that.
Yeah, for those of you that have not seen the EC Henry's video on it, I recommend watching it. Again, it's only about 5 minutes in length. It's a very quick watch. And I'm in a weird position personally where I liked the La Sirena designs. I thought the holographics was actually really cool. I enjoyed them. It didn't bother me at all. But I'm also in the camp when I watched your video where I'm like, that's a cooler idea. Mm-hmm. I didn't hate what they did in Picard, but I thought your idea was very cool. And I remember very specifically the moment where I said that to myself, which was, you had brought up a point in the video where wouldn't it have been cool if when Picard sat down at the captain's
That's
chair...
That's exactly what came to my mind from the video too, that made me change my mind a little, or question my idea a little. Right,
where Picard would have brought up the panel from the Enterprise D, like the navigational panel, the con from the Enterprise D, so it felt more natural to him, and it would have been a great plug for us diehard Trek fans to really just kind of geek out over and been like, oh, that's so cool, it's so great that they brought that in. Brie, from your perspective of somebody who's a fan of the franchise but may not necessarily get into this minutia, what did you think of the holograms? What did you think about EC's video and all that about the holograms we saw from La Sirena?
So I'm actually kind of in the same camp as you. I didn't hate the holograms. Kind of the way I was looking at it is I was kind of putting it into two camps, where perhaps the holograms that you see on these high-tech ships, the flagship, so Enterprise from TNG, you've got Voyager, which is a advanced ship. Those holograms were seen as, like, even in TNG, they were like, wow, this is wild. And in Voyager, it took a while for anyone to even see the Doctor as anything other than just a piece of technology. So, and that was very advanced. So perhaps there's the really advanced holograms that are, basically just could be tangible things. And then there's the more on a budget holograms, like where someone's own personal ship that maybe isn't a flagship ship wouldn't be able to have those but then I say that, but he's got the holographic interface, so it's like one of those where they can't have both. You either have the holograms like he has for his crew member, like him as holograms, where they look like holograms, or like they look like people, but then the cheap, like the more, I think had they done one or the other, I could actually stick with that, but that's kind of what I was envisioning possibly. But at the same time, then why would he have an advanced and an unadvanced, holographic system on the same ship, unless one was an upgrade or something?
Eh,
But I did
You,
like how it looked. But yeah, seeing EC's video, I was like, okay, as much as I like the design of it, I can see how that would have been more interesting.
so you bring up an interesting point, right, in terms of the different tiers of where holograms should be at. And EC, I'm going to throw this question to you, which is does it bother you that they bothered to have the holographic interfaces of the controls on the La Serena, but when we cut to the ship that Riker was on, we still saw physical consoles everywhere. I mean, obviously, it was a redress of the Discovery bridge, and I get that. But does it bother you that if these things are so common that this simple freighter would have it, that the one of these, the most advanced Federation battleship ever created in the history of the Federation also was not sporting those holographic kinds of controls? Or do you think it's like maybe some ships have it and some ships don't, and maybe it's more of like a weird luxury or personal preference thing? How does that strike you?
I guess you could easily justify it by saying that Captain Rios is just kind of dumb and uses impractical controls, whereas Starfleet is still using controls that actually work, or time tested kind of stuff. So like you could easily justify it. In my mind, the fewer the better.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, what distracted me about that scene was that it's a redress of the Discovery Bridge.
Yeah, right.
Like there's just so many, like here's where I'm at. Normally I'd be very eager to entertain theories like that. Like, well, let's try to justify this.
Mm-hmm.
I have trouble from the very get-go. I have trouble looking at Picard seriously from a canon standpoint, because just how egregious some of the choices are with the visuals. So like, I'm not even sure if I should take it literally. Like, in my mind, that's maybe not what bridge of that ship actually looks like. They chose to do a redress of the Discovery Bridge because that was cheap and easy.
Right.
However, in my mind, I'm thinking, is that really how it looks, or is that just easy to do something else how it looks? Like,
I hear what you're saying there. Like if we were to ever visit that ship again, would they bother to spend some more money and actually create a different looking bridge? Probably. I hear what you're saying though, for sure. Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense.
That rationale can be used for other things in Star Trek, which is what they did with Klingons, for instance. Like when the Klingons showed up in the motion picture, they weren't making a new kind of Klingon. They were telling us that Klingons in the original series also looked like this, but we didn't have the money to make them look like that.
Right.
So I'm kind of looking at Picard in a lot of the same kind of way, where it's like, if for instance I somehow got the reins on Star Trek in the future, I wouldn't use any visual inspiration from Picard whatsoever. I would pretend that Picard looked like something else this whole time. I would completely visually retcon it. So like that's kind of my position. So like when I'm being asked to kind of like theorize or justify something for Picard, like my first thought is, well, it just wasn't that way to begin with. But of course that's, kind of pig-headed, but that's my first instinct anyway.
Well, I mean, every one of us is entitled to feel the way we want to feel about it. I'm going to respond back to you here, but I want to open it up really quickly. Folks in the chat, if you want to go ahead and ask any questions that you may want to have us kind of discuss really quickly at the end here, now's the time to go ahead and get those in there, and we'll try to address a couple of those as they come up. You're right to say, like, there is, like, I mean, there is precedence there, right? Where, like, you just brought up a really great point of Gene saying, this is the way that the Klingons were supposed to look. This is the way I originally wanted them to look, but we didn't have the money to do it. And yeah, we retconned his answer to that, but there was a historical kind of context put into that 22 years later in the Enterprise episode where they talked about the mutations and all that stuff like that. So they tried to create a in-universe explanation for the lack of money that they had in the original series. But there is precedence for shows having to cut corners in regards to certain designs because of financial constraints. But I do struggle to even digest that for a show like Picard that reportedly had a 90 to $100 million budget, whatever that was, and they could have done something different. It definitely felt like, for me, it felt like that whole sequence there at the end where Riker showed up on board the ship felt like it was something that they definitely thought about later on, which is why they kind of rushed it a little bit. So maybe if they had more time with that concept in script, they would have generated either a green screen effect for a different type of bridge, or they would have gone some other way with the design internally in terms of a physical set being built. But it is an interesting thing, like the visuals and how people react to what they're seeing on screen and their ability to connect these newer shows to the franchise of Star Trek as a whole. And, Brie, I'm going to throw this to you, is seeing all of these different designs, not only just with Picard, but also with Discovery in a lot of ways, which causes its own separate issues because of the time period they put it in, which is another separate conversation. From your perspective, does it impact your ability to, at least on an initial viewing, not necessarily after you've had time to think about it, but as you're initially viewing it and experiencing the shows firsthand, first time, does it impact your ability to connect what you're seeing on screen to Star Trek of the past?
No, not really. In fact, a really good example is in the finale of Picard. The very first time I watched the space battle, I didn't even think to look at the ships to see if they were all the same. It wasn't until you guys pointed it out to me and I went back and watched it a second time that I even noticed that they were all the same ship. Because, I don't know, I just wasn't paying attention to the ships quite as much as I was the story. But this is also someone who, I've grown up acting. I've done acting for a long time. So for me, my primary focus in any show that I watch is going to be one, how the actors act, and two, the story. So anything beyond that is icing on the cake to me. But the first time viewing something like that, I don't notice it. It's not until I go back several times and actually start nitpicking things that I even notice stuff like that, just because I'm so focused on something else.
And I think everybody's viewpoint is so valid. Star Trek is such a wide, diverse group of fans associated with it that we're all kind of experiencing it in our own ways. And it is interesting. That's why I enjoy these kinds of discussions, because all of us are viewing it from a different lens and our different experiences and our different kinds of opinions on certain things. And it's interesting, I feel like to kind of gain some insight to how other people experience some of these things, even just from a visual standpoint. So let's go ahead and go to some of the questions here in the chat. We have a question here from Robbie Duffield. It says, I wonder if Section 31 will be in Discovery again. I'm going to throw that to you, EC. Would you like to see Section 31 again?
Oh, I don't want to see it, but I have a strong feeling that they're not going to. I think that they really like Section 31 for some reason. I guess Kurtzman is into that kind of stuff. I don't want to see it more, but I would not be surprised if we saw it again even in Discovery Season 3. There's some Section 31 presence on the Discovery itself, and they have their own agenda in the future. I would not be surprised.
And Brie, what do you think about that?
I'm complete opposite. I love Section 31. I always want more Section 31 stuff. It's some of my favorite stuff. When I go back and watch Deep Space Nine, I recently even did because I'll go back and I'll watch all the series, but plot lines as they connect, overarching through series. And one of them I did recently was Section 31, where I watched the Deep Space Nine episodes, the Enterprise had Discovery, Deep Space Nine. Did it ever show up after Enterprise? Yeah, Deep Space Nine, Enterprise, and Discovery. And I watched in succession to see. I like those storylines. I think Section 31, even if it's one of those things where why would Starfleet have something like that? I mean, why does... I'm not gonna... Never mind. I was gonna bring a real world thing in, so I'm not trying to get political, but I really think that to me it makes sense to have an agency that maybe doesn't actually do what the parent agency says is the right thing to do, because they're fuck it. CIA, everyone's like, oh, the CIA means the best. But if you go back and you look at anything the CIA has done in the past, it's are you sure they meant the best? So it's one of those things where I see it as like that version of, but in Starfleet, and that's how I view it as. So I like Section 31 storylines personally.
Yeah, and this is great. This is two very opposite views on Section 31. I would say, from my perspective, I lean more towards. I'm kind of in the middle again, where I'm open to more Section 31. I don't hate them, but I feel like even if they were to put them back into the show, they need to be in a more subdued position as opposed to being essentially the antagonists of the entire series. I know they kind of focused on quote unquote control, the AI control being the antagonist, but it was a Section 31 thing, and Section 31 overall was viewed as an antagonistic force in season 2, and I would prefer them to be a little bit more in the background of certain things. But I agree.
I agree with that.
Yeah, with EC, I think you're right. I think they do have Kurtzman, for whatever reason, and I'm not quite sure why, he has a huge love affair with Section 31. So I would be very surprised if they are not. I mean, so much so that he's trying to get the Section 31 show off the ground. Like, he wants a whole show dedicated to it. So I don't know what his obsession is with it, but I think that there's a good likelihood that that they will make another appearance. So something else here. Next thing I want to talk about real quickly before we wrap up the stream. And Dan23 brings this up, and it's something I wanted to talk to you guys about. In DS9, The Visitor, it tells us that in the future, they don't use two-dimensional controls. And I do remember this episode, and this was kind of coming up. This popped in my head as we were having the holographic interface discussion. And my feelings on that are, I don't know if we should base future Star Trek designs and shows off of essentially a throwaway kind of joke line that was put into an episode. But what do you guys think about that? EC, what do you think about that reference?
Oh, my thought is his comment is not incompatible with my idea. Like, I think Bashir says, I haven't worked a two-dimensional control panel in a long time. How did we manage? And that could mean so many things. Like, for instance, it could mean that he's talking about smooth, glassy touchscreens. Right. And in the future, they have adaptive material that raises and lowers buttons and stuff. Quote unquote, regress to buttons, but it's actually a touchscreen that raises and has a three-dimensional surface. Then a two-dimensional control panel would be a flat touchscreen, which is worse than buttons in a lot of ways. The benefits of a touchscreen are that it can change, the layout can change, and you could have multiple control panels in one panel. But it does have disadvantages, like loss of tactile feedback. You could have both in the future with three-dimensional touchscreens. Then his line makes sense. Or holographic control panels, which would be three-dimensional control panels, quote unquote, but they wouldn't be floating holograms. So when Bashir makes that line, the very first thought in my mind is not floating holograms, like every single sci-fi is doing now. My thoughts go to, a lot of different things. Okay.
Brie, what do you think about that line?
I'm kind of more in the camp of more like what I was trying to get at with that whole, newer, older version is, perhaps it was almost like a stepping stone. One of those two, maybe that really, the more like see-through control panel was a stepping stone to the idea that EC has, where, maybe after doing that for a while, they were like, okay, we can see there's problems. Maybe we need to find a solution. So perhaps that was a jumping off point for a more advanced hologram that emulates an actual tangible object or something like that.
Yeah, no, I think that's I think both of you guys have good thoughts on that. Yeah, like I said, my personal feeling on it is I think it was just a line that they injected in that storyline to be kind of funny. I don't think it was necessarily meant to be taken taken from that context and used as a strong, wielding defense line for the design choices on board the La Sirena. I don't think that's what they had in mind when they put that line in there. And I don't think it necessarily, like you said, EC, equated directly to what we saw. And like what you said, Brie, is maybe it was more of a stepping stone type situation there for sure. So, all right, that's going to go ahead and wrap up our live stream for today. I want to thank everybody in the chat for being here and being a part of this journey. And of course, I want to thank Brie for participating as well and helping me co-host today's discussion. And of course, a huge thank you goes out to EC Henry. Again, EC Henry has a YouTube channel. He's got his Patreon set up. He's got his website. He's got all sorts of stuff on social media. You'll definitely be able to find him online. If you have not already subscribed to his channel, you absolutely should be subscribed. He does fantastic videos, not only breaking things down, but also just giving really great food for thought, which is what I'm glad that we were able to kind of dive into some of his ideas and thoughts today during this discussion. EC, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure.
And Brie, thank you so much for being here as well.
Of course.
All right. And for all of us here at Trek Central, I hope everyone stays safe and is enjoying their weekend. And we'll see all of you guys and gals next time.